What happens when a 17-year-old girl walks into what should be the most magical night of her high school career, only to face a carefully orchestrated campaign of racial humiliation? What happens when classmates who smile to her face reveal their true colors under the glittering lights of a prom venue? And what happens when they discover that the quiet new girl they've been tormenting possesses a strength they never could have imagined? This is the story of Zara Williams, a brilliant black teenager who transferred to Millbrook Preparatory Academy in her senior year, carrying not just the weight of being the new kid, but the burden of being one of only 12 black students in a school of 800. On the night of May 15th, 2023, at the Ritz-Carlton Ballroom in suburban Connecticut, Zara faced a level of racist cruelty that would have broken many young people. But what her tormentors didn't know was that behind her gentle smile and scholarly demeanor was a young woman who had spent years training her body and mind through the discipline of boxing, not to hurt others, but to never let others break. Her spirit. This isn't just another story about teenage bullying. This is a story about the intersection of racism and misogyny that black girls face in predominantly white spaces, about the psychological armor that marginalized young people must build to survive, and about how one girl's response to hatred became a catalyst for systemic change in her school and beyond. As research shows, black girls experience both racial and gender-based discrimination, facing adultification bias that robs them of their childhood innocence, while simultaneously being hypersexualized and criminalized at rates far exceeding their white peers. Zara's story teaches us that strength isn't always about fighting back with fists. Sometimes it's about standing tall when others try to make you small, speaking truth when others spread lies, and transforming pain into power in ways that create lasting change. This is her story, and it's a story that every young person facing discrimination needs to hear. Zara Williams was born in 2005 in Oakland, California, to parents who understood both the power of education and the persistence of racism in American schools. Her father, Marcus Williams, was a high school English teacher who had navigated predominantly white institutions his entire career. Her mother, Dr. Angela Williams, was a pediatrician who had been one of only 3 black women in her medical school class. Together, they had created a household where academic excellence was expected, cultural pride was celebrated, and resilience was taught as a survival skill. The Williams family's move to Millbrook, Connecticut, in Zara's junior year was driven by Dr. Williams' new position at Yale New Haven Hospital. The transition from Oakland's diverse, vibrant community to the manicured lawns and hidden prejudices of suburban Connecticut was jarring for 17-year-old Zara. She went from being part of a majority black student body where her intelligence was celebrated and her identity affirmed, to being scrutinized, questioned, and othered in ways both subtle and overt. MLBROOK Preparatory Academy was the kind of elite private school where tuition cost more than many families' annual income, where alumni included senators and CEOs, and where diversity was more marketing slogan than lived reality. The school's glossy brochures featured carefully positioned students of color, but the daily experience for black students was one of isolation, microaggressions, and constant pressure to represent their entire race while suppressing any behavior that might be deemed too black by their white classmates and teachers. The racial climate of 2020s America created a unique set of challenges for black teenagers like Zara. While conversations about diversity and inclusion had become mainstream in corporate boardrooms and college campuses, the lived experience of black students in predominantly white high schools remained largely unchanged. They faced the same code switching, the same assumptions about their intellectual capabilities, and the same social exclusion that had plagued previous generations, but now with the added pressure of performing gratitude for whatever minimal progress had been made. Zara's coping mechanism had been discovered years earlier in a community boxing gym in Oakland. What started as an after-school activity recommended by her parents to build confidence had evolved into a passion that shaped her entire worldview. Under the guidance of Coach Maria Santos, a former professional boxer who had dedicated her post-fighting career to empowering young women, Zara learned that boxing was never about violence. It was about discipline, mental toughness, strategic thinking, and the unshakable confidence that comes from knowing you can handle whatever comes your way. Boxing teaches you that getting hit isn't the worst thing that can happen to you. Coach Santos had told her during one particularly difficult training session, "The worst thing is staying down when you get hit. We train your body to be strong, but more importantly, we train your mind to be unbreakable." By age 16, Zara had won 3 junior amateur championships and was being scouted by college programs. But more than the trophies or the scholarship opportunities, boxing had given her something invaluable: the psychological armor to navigate spaces where she wasn't wanted, the mental discipline to focus on her goals despite distractions, and the physical confidence that radiated from knowing she could defend herself if necessary. The move to Connecticut had meant leaving behind Coach Santos and the gym community that had become her second family. In Millbrook, she had found a local boxing club, but the environment was different, more focused on fitness than empowerment, more concerned with technique than building character. She trained 3 times a week, maintaining her skills and conditioning, but missing the community and mentorship that had been so crucial to her development. At Millbrook Prep, Zara's academic excellence was immediately evident but consistently questioned. Despite earning the highest grades in her advanced placement classes, teachers seemed surprised by her performance and frequently asked if she was getting extra help at home. When she scored a perfect 1600 on her SATs, a guidance counselor suggested she retake the test to make sure it wasn't a fluke. Her classmates alternated between ignoring her completely and subjecting her to a constant stream of microaggressions disguised as curiosity about her hair, her background, and her real plans after graduation. The social dynamics were even more challenging. Zara's natural beauty, intelligence, and quiet confidence made her stand out in ways that threatened some of her white female classmates and intrigued some of the white male students. But rather than being accepted or celebrated, she found herself navigating a complex web of racial and gender-based stereotypes that followed her through every classroom, cafeteria, and social gathering. She was simultaneously fetishized and demonized, seen as both exotic and threatening. White boys who asked her out did so with the assumption that she would be grateful for their attention, while white girls either excluded her from social activities or subjected her to passive-aggressive comments about affirmative action and diversity quotas. A few other black students at the school had their own survival strategies and weren't necessarily interested in forming solidarity with the new girl who might draw unwanted attention to their carefully maintained low profiles. By senior year, Zara had developed a reputation as someone who was academically brilliant but socially aloof. She participated in required activities, maintained her grades, and counted down the days until she could leave for Howard University, where she had been accepted with a full academic scholarship. She had learned to navigate the daily indignities of being black at Millbrook Prep with grace and strategic silence, saving her energy for her boxing training and her college preparation. But all of her preparation, all of her mental training, and all of her carefully constructed emotional defenses would be tested on the night that was supposed to be a celebration of her high school journey. Prom night 2023 would reveal the true depths of her classmates, prejudice, and the remarkable strength she had cultivated to face it. The Ritz-Carlton ballroom had been transformed into a winter wonderland for Millbrook Preparatory Academy senior. Prom, with crystal chandeliers casting ethereal light over ice blue decorations and silver accents. The theme was Enchanted Evening, And for most of the 200 students in attendance, it promised to be exactly that, a magical culmination of their high school experience and a launching pad into their bright futures. Zara Williams stood at the entrance in a stunning emerald green gown that her mother had helped her choose, its elegant silhouette complementing her natural grace, while the vibrant color celebrated her radiant brown skin. She had spent hours getting ready with her mother, sharing stories and laughter, while Dr. Williams helped with her daughter's makeup and styled her hair in an intricate updo that showcased the delicate gold earrings that had belonged to her grandmother. "You look absolutely beautiful, sweetheart," Dr. Williams had said, adjusting Zara's necklace with tears in her eyes. "More importantly, you are brilliant, strong, and worthy of every good thing this world has to offer. Don't let anyone make you forget that tonight." Zara had chosen to attend prom solo, declining invitations from several boys whose interests seemed more about novelty than genuine connection. She was looking forward to dancing with friends, celebrating her academic achievements, and creating one positive memory from her time at Millbrook Prep before heading to Howard University in the fall. But from the moment she entered the ballroom, Zara could sense that something was different about the way her classmates were looking at her. The usual mix of curiosity and indifference had been replaced by something more calculated, more malicious. Small groups of students whispered and pointed in her direction, their expressions ranging from smug anticipation to barely concealed excitement. The first sign of trouble came during the cocktail reception, when Madison Crawford, the prom queen and daughter of a prominent local judge, approached Zara with a group of her followers. Madison had perfected the art of cruelty disguised, as concerned, and her voice dripped with false sweetness as she spoke. "Zara, honey, you look so interesting tonight," Madison said, her eyes scanning Zara's dress with theatrical surprise. "I just want to make sure you know that the theme is enchanted evening, not urban glamour. Did someone explain the dress code to you?" The group giggled at Madison's thinly veiled insult, but Zara maintained her composure, drawing on years of training in emotional regulation that boxing had taught her. "Thank you for your concern, Madison," she replied evenly. "I'm quite comfortable with my choices." But Madison wasn't finished. "Oh, I'm sure you are. It's just that some of us were wondering if you might be more comfortable at a different kind of party. You know, somewhere that's more your speed, more your ... demographic." The racist implication was clear to everyone within earshot, but Madison had crafted her words carefully enough to maintain plausible deniability. This was how modern racism operated in elite spaces, through coded language, subtle exclusion, and the weaponization of social dynamics that could destroy someone's spirit without leaving fingerprints. Zara felt her jaw clench involuntarily, her body responding to the threat even as her mind remained focused. She thought of Coach Santos's words about staying calm under pressure, about not letting opponents dictate her rhythm or emotional state. "I appreciate your concern," she said quietly, "but I think I'll stay right here." The confrontation attracted the attention of other students, who began gathering in a loose circle around the exchange. Some looked uncomfortable, recognizing the ugliness of what was happening, but unwilling to intervene. Others seemed entertained, pulling out their phones to record what they anticipated would be a dramatic confrontation. Madison's boyfriend, Trevor Hamilton, joined the group with several of his friends from the lacrosse team. Trevor came from old Connecticut money, the kind of family whose wealth stretched back generations and whose prejudices were passed down like heirlooms. He looked at Zara with the same entitled arrogance that his ancestors had probably used to look at enslaved people. Ladies, Trevor interjected with mock diplomacy, "let's not make a scene." I'm sure Zara just misunderstood the assignment. Maybe she thought this was one of those diversity events the school keeps pushing on us. The comment drew laughter from his crew, emboldening Madison to escalate her attack. "You know what, Trevor? You're probably right. Zara, sweetie, I know it must be confusing being the new girl and all, but prom isn't really about making statements. It's about fitting in, about celebrating our class together. Maybe you could try to be less conspicuous? The word conspicuous hung in the air like a racial slur barely disguised. Zara understood that her very presence, her beauty, her intelligence, her refusal to make herself small, was being characterized as aggressive, attention-seeking, inappropriate. This was the adultification bias that research had documented. Black girls being seen as less innocent, more mature, more threatening than their white peers. Other students began joining the circle, drawn by the spectacle, but unwilling to intervene. Zara recognized the pattern from her boxing training. When facing multiple opponents, the key was to stay calm, assess the situation, and choose your battles strategically. These weren't physical opponents, but the principle was the same. I think there might be some confusion, Zara said, her voice carrying clearly across the growing crowd. I'm not here to make statements or create controversy. I'm here to celebrate graduating from high school, the same as everyone else. But Madison had the scent of blood in the water and wasn't backing down. Oh, honey, that's sweet, but let's be honest about what's really happening here. You've been at our school for less than 2 years, and suddenly you're valedictorian. You've got college scouts calling, and now you're here at our prom, acting like you own the place. Some of us have been working toward these achievements our whole lives. The accusation was breathtaking in its audacity and familiar in its racism. Madison was suggesting that Zara's academic success was somehow illegitimate, that her achievements were unearned, that her presence at prom was presumptuous. It was the same logic that had been used to question Barack Obama's citizenship, to challenge the credentials of every successful black person in America. Shriver stepped closer, his voice dropping to what he probably thought was a threatening whisper, but was actually loud enough for everyone to hear. You know what I think? I think you're here to make some kind of point, to make us all look bad, to play the victim when people notice that you don't really belong here. The crowd had grown to include nearly 50 students, all watching to see how Zara would respond to this increasingly overt racial harassment. She could feel her heart rate increasing, her muscles tensing, her body preparing for fight or flight. But she also felt something else, the deep, centered calm that came from years of training, from knowing who she was and what she was capable of. What happened next would be replayed on social media for weeks, analyzed in think pieces about racism, in elite schools, and remembered by everyone present as the moment when a quiet girl revealed the fierce strength that had been hidden beneath her gracious exterior. Madison, sensing that she had pushed Zara to the breaking point and confident that she had won the psychological battle, decided to deliver what she thought would be the final blow. She stepped directly in front of Zara, her voice rising so everyone could hear, and said, "You know what, Zara? Maybe it's time someone told you the truth. You don't belong here. You never did. This school, this prom, this whole world, it wasn't made for people like you. So why don't you stop pretending and go back to wherever it is you came from?" The ballroom fell completely silent. Even the background music seemed to fade as 200 students waited to see how Zara would respond to this naked display of racism. Madison stood with her arms crossed, smug in her certainty that she had just delivered a knockout blow to the girl who had dared to excel in her space. Zara Williams had been training for this moment her entire life, even if she hadn't known it. Drawing on every lesson Coach Santos had taught her about mental toughness, every meditation her parents had shared about dignity in the face of hatred, and every hour she had spent building physical and psychological strength in the boxing ring. She took a deep breath and made a choice that would change everything. Instead of backing down, instead of crying, instead of leaving in humiliation, as Madison expected, Zara stepped forward. Her voice, when she spoke, carried the quiet authority of someone who had faced much worse and a privileged teenager's racism and emerge stronger. You're absolutely right about one thing, Madison, Zara said, her words cutting through the silence. Like a blade, this world wasn't made for people like me. It was made for people like you, people who inherit opportunities instead of earning them, people who mistake privilege for merit, people who think that tearing others down makes them. Stand taller. The crowd shifted uncomfortably as Zara continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. But here's what you don't understand. I didn't come here to fit into your world. I came here to change it. Every test I aced, every record I broke, every barrier I crossed, I did it to prove that your assumptions about people like me are not just wrong. They're pathetically small. Madison's confident smirk began to falter as Zara stepped even closer, her presence somehow filling the space around them. You want to know what I am? I'm a 3-time junior amateur boxing champion. I'm a future Howard University student on a full academic scholarship. I'm the daughter of a doctor and a teacher who taught me that my worth isn't determined by the approval of people who are afraid to earn what they have. The revelation about her boxing background sent murmurs through the crowd, but Zara wasn't. Finished. You tried to humiliate me because you thought I was weak, thought I was alone, thought I would crumble under pressure. But what you don't understand is that every day I've spent in this school has been training for moments like this. Every snide comment, every rolled eye, every assumption about my intelligence or my character, it's all been preparation for right now. Madison tried to interrupt, but Zara's voice had taken on the command presence of a trained athlete addressing an opponent. I could end this conversation in ways you can't imagine, but I won't. Not because I'm weak, but because I'm strong enough to choose how my story ends. I'm strong enough to walk away from your hatred and still hold my head high. I'm strong enough to graduate at the top of this class, despite everything you've done to make me feel unwelcome. Zara paused, looking around. The circle of faces that surrounded her, some shocked, some ashamed, some inspired. So thank you, Madison. Thank you for showing everyone exactly who you are. Thank you for proving that all the privilege in the world can't buy class, character, or courage. And most of all, thank you for giving me the opportunity to show everyone exactly who I am. With that, Zara turned and began walking toward the exit, her head held high and her back straight. But what happened next would transform her moment of personal triumph into something much larger and more powerful. The video went viral within hours. Multiple students had recorded Madison Crawford's racist attack and Zara's powerful response. And by midnight, #ZaraWilliams was trending across all social media platforms. The footage captured not just the immediate confrontation, but the faces of the 200 students who had stood by and watched a black girl be humiliated at her own prom, and the stunning grace with which she had defended herself. But viral fame, Zara quickly discovered, was a double-edged sword that cut as deeply as it elevated. The initial wave of support was overwhelming. Civil rights leaders praised her composure and courage. Fellow students from schools across the country shared their own stories of racial harassment, using #IceT and with Zara. Boxing gyms from coast to coast invited her to train, recognizing a champion's heart in her response to cruelty. Howard University's president personally called to congratulate her and ensure she knew the entire university community stood behind her. What you did wasn't just brave, Dr. Wayne Frederick told her during their phone conversation. You embodied the excellence and dignity that Howard has been cultivating in young black leaders for over 150 years. We're honored that you've chosen to continue your journey with us. But with support came backlash, and the attacks were vicious and coordinated. Conservative media outlets framed Zara as an aggressive black girl who had threatened her white classmates. Social media trolls dissected her appearance, questioned her achievements, and spread false narratives about her background and her family. The comments sections of articles about the incident were filled with racial slurs and threats that law enforcement would later investigate. The personal toll was devastating. Zara had spent 2 years carefully constructing emotional armor, too. Survive at Millbrook Prep, but nothing had prepared her for the global scrutiny that followed her moment of defiance. She couldn't leave her house without being recognized, couldn't check social media without seeing her face attached to debates about racism, respectability politics, and appropriate responses to discrimination. Sleep became elusive. Zara found herself replaying the confrontation obsessively, wondering if she could have handled it differently, if she had made things worse for herself and other black students, if her response had been too aggressive or not aggressive enough. The criticism from some quarters of the black community was particularly painful, voices suggesting she should have been more diplomatic, should have turned the other cheek, should have considered the impact of her words on Madison's future. "Baby girl," her father said during one of their late-night conversations, "you can't control how people interpret your strength. Some folks will always find fault with how black people respond to racism too passive, and you're weak, too assertive. And you're angry. You spoke your truth with dignity, and that's all anyone can ask." But the scrutiny extended beyond social media. The incident had attracted the attention of journalists, documentary filmmakers, and academic researchers studying racism in elite educational institutions. Everyone wanted to interview Zara, to analyze her story, to use her experience to support their particular narrative about race in America. The girl who had just wanted to attend her prom had become an unwilling symbol in national conversations about racism, privilege, and resistance. The impact on her family was profound and concerning. Dr. Williams began receiving threatening phone calls at the hospital where she worked. Marcus Williams was subjected to increased scrutiny from his school administration, who worried about controversy by association. The family's home address was posted online by trolls, forcing them to temporarily relocate and hire security services they couldn't really afford. "This is exactly why we try to keep our heads down," Marcus Williams confided to his wife during one particularly difficult evening. "We tell our children to excel quietly, to not make waves, because this is what happens when we stand up. The whole system comes down on our heads." But Zara was learning that silence had its own costs, and her moment of defiance had revealed truths that couldn't be unseen or unspoken. The video of Madison's racist attack had exposed not just individual prejudice, but institutional patterns of discrimination that had been hidden beneath Millbrook Prep's veneer of elite respectability. Investigative journalists began examining the school's disciplinary records, discovering that black students were suspended at rates 5 times higher than white students, despite representing less than 2% of the student body. They found evidence of grade manipulation that had prevented black students from achieving valedictorian status in previous years. They uncovered a pattern of college recommendation letters that subtly undermined black students' applications through coded language about attitude and fit. The pressure on Millbrook Prep intensified when parents of other students began coming forward with their own stories of discrimination. A black sophomore's parents revealed that their daughter had been excluded from advanced placement classes despite exceptional grades. A Latino family shared evidence that their son had been subjected to constant harassment about his immigration status, despite being a third-generation American citizen. The media attention also revealed the broader context of Zara's experience. Education researchers used her story to highlight the documented phenomenon of adultification bias, explaining how black girls are perceived as more mature, less innocent, and more threatening than their white peers. Mental health experts discussed the psychological impact of racial microaggressions on adolescent development, using Zara's composure under pressure as an example of remarkable resilience. But perhaps the most significant development was the response from other students, both at Millbrook Prep and at schools across the country. The video of Zara's response had inspired young people who had faced similar discrimination to speak out about their own experiences. A movement began to emerge, with students organizing walkouts, demanding diverse curricula, and calling for accountability from administrators who had ignored patterns of racist behavior at Millbrook Prep itself. The student body was deeply divided. Some students, inspired by Zara's courage, began organizing a diversity and inclusion committee to address the school's culture of exclusion. Others, particularly those who had been present during the prom incident and had said nothing to intervene, struggled with guilt and shame about their complicity in Madison's attack. The school's administration found itself under unprecedented pressure. Alumni threatened to withdraw financial support unless changes were made. The Connecticut Department of Education launched an investigation into discriminatory practices. Several teachers came forward to report that they had witnessed racist behavior from students and parents, but had been discouraged from addressing it by administrators who prioritized reputation over justice. Madison Crawford, who had expected to be celebrated for putting Zara in her place, instead found herself facing consequences she had never imagined. Several colleges rescinded their acceptance offers after the video went viral. Her father, Judge William Crawford, recused himself from several cases involving racial issues to avoid conflicts of interest. The Crawford family, who had been pillars of Millbrook's social elite, suddenly found themselves pariahs in their own community. The legal implications were also significant. Civil rights attorneys reached out to Zara's family, offering to file discrimination lawsuits against the school and potentially against individual students who had participated in the harassment. The incident had been so well documented and so clearly motivated by racial animus that it presented an unusually strong case for legal action. But Zara was struggling with decisions that no 17-year-old should have to make. Should she pursue legal action that could drag out the trauma for years? Should she continue speaking out about racism and risk further retaliation? Should she try to move on quietly and focus on her transition to college? The weight of representing not just herself, but every black student who had faced similar discrimination was crushing. Every decision she made would be scrutinized, criticized, and used to support or undermine broader arguments about racism, resistance, and respectability. The boxing training that had given her strength in the moment seemed inadequate to help her navigate the complex aftermath of her defiance. 3 weeks after prom night, Zara sat in her father's study, surrounded by college brochures, legal documents, and interview requests from media outlets around the world. She was scheduled to graduate as valedictorian in just 2 weeks, but the achievement felt hollow in the face of everything that had transpired. "I just wanted to go to prom," she said to her parents, tears finally coming after weeks of maintaining her composure for the cameras and the critics. "I just wanted one normal night before I left this place behind forever." Her mother knelt beside her chair, taking her hands the way she had when Zara was a small child facing playground bullies. "Baby, there's nothing normal about being exceptional in a world that expects you to be ordinary. What you did that night wasn't just standing up for yourself. It was standing up for every black girl who's ever been told she doesn't belong." But even as Dr. Williams spoke words of comfort and pride, all 3 members of the Williams family understood that Zara's life had been irrevocably changed by 60 seconds of racist hatred and her response to it. The question now was whether that change would ultimately empower or embitter the young woman who had shown such remarkable strength in her moment of testing. The answer would come in the most unexpected way, from the most unlikely source, and would transform not just Zara's story, but the entire community that had tried to break her spirit. The transformation began with a letter that arrived at the Williams family home on a Tuesday morning in early June, just days before Zara's graduation from Millbrook Prep. The envelope or the letterhead of Crawford and Associates, Judge William Crawford's law firm, and Zara's first instinct was to throw it away, assuming it was some kind of legal threat or intimidation tactic from Madison's family. But when Dr. Williams opened the letter, they discovered something entirely unexpected. A handwritten note from Madison Crawford herself, requesting a private meeting with Zara before graduation. "I know I don't deserve your time or your forgiveness," Madison had written in careful script. "But there are things I need to say to you, and things I need to understand about what I did and why I did it. If you're willing to meet with me, I promise I'll listen more than I talk." Zara's initial reaction was dismissive. After weeks of dealing with the aftermath of Madison's racist attack, the last thing she wanted was to provide therapy or closure for her tormentor. But something about the tone of the letter, the vulnerability evident in the handwriting, and the fact that Madison was reaching out at all made her reconsider. "It could be a trap," Marcus Williams warned during their family discussion. "These people have shown you who they are. Why would you give them another opportunity to hurt you?" But Dr. Williams saw something different in the letter. "Sometimes people surprise you," she said thoughtfully. "Sometimes shame and consequences can crack open hearts that seemed permanently closed. I'm not saying you should meet with her, Zara, but I'm saying the healing for everyone involved sometimes requires conversations we don't want to have." After consulting with Coach Santos, who had flown in from Oakland to support Zara through graduation week, Zara agreed to meet with Madison in a neutral location, the office of Dr. Patricia Morrison, a black therapist who specialized in racial trauma and reconciliation work. The meeting that took place on June 8, 2023, would later be described by Dr. Morrison as one of the most powerful exchanges she had witnessed in 20 years of practice. Madison arrived looking nothing like the confident, cruel teenager who had attacked Zara at prom night. She was thinner, her usually perfect appearance disheveled, her eyes red from what appeared to be weeks of crying. "Thank you for coming," Madison said quietly, unable to make eye contact with Zara. "I know you didn't have to, and I know I don't deserve it." For the first hour, Madison did something she had probably never done in her 18 years of life. She listened. Dr. Morrison guided Zara through a recounting of not just the prom incident, but her entire experience at Millbrook Prep, the microaggressions, the academic questioning, the social exclusion, and the daily burden of being seen as a representative of her race rather than as an individual. Madison's tears began during Zara's description of the isolation she felt, but they turned into full sobs when Zara talked about the impact on her family, the threats they had received, and the way the incident had overshadowed what should have been a celebration of her academic achievements. "I never thought about any of that," Madison whispered. "I never thought about you as a real person with feelings and a family and dreams. I just saw you as a threat to everything I thought belonged to me." What followed was 3 hours of conversation that peeled back layers of privilege, prejudice, and pain that both girls had been carrying. Madison revealed the pressure she felt to maintain her family's social status, the racist attitudes she had absorbed from her parents, and their social circle, and the fear she felt when Zara's excellence highlighted her own mediocrity. "My parents have been telling me my whole life that I'm special, that I deserve the best of everything, that our family is better than other families," Madison said through tears. "When you came to our school and just ... excelled at everything, it threatened the story I had been told about myself. Instead of questioning whether that story was true, I decided you were the problem." But the most powerful moment came when Madison asked a question that revealed the depth of her transformation. "How do I make this right? Not just with you, but with everyone I've hurt, everyone my family has hurt, everyone who looks like you. That people like me have been hurting for centuries?" Zara sat quietly for a moment, drawing on the mental discipline that boxing had taught her to think strategically even in emotional moments. When she finally spoke, her words would reshape not just Madison's future, but the future of their entire school community. "You can't undo what you did," Zara said clearly. "And you can't fix racism by apologizing to one black girl. But what you can do is use your privilege differently. You can speak up when other people say the things you used to say. You can question the systems that gave you advantages you didn't earn. You can make sure that what happened to me never happens to another student at our school." Madison nodded eagerly, but Zara wasn't finished. "Most importantly, you can stop centering yourself in conversations about racism. This can't be about your guilt or your redemption or your journey to becoming a better person. It has to be about justice, equity, and making sure that students who come after us don't have to be as strong as I had to be just to get an education." The conversation ended with Madison making a commitment that would shock the Millbrook prep community and provide a template for accountability that would be studied by educators nationwide. Working with Dr. Morrison and civil rights organizations, Madison developed a comprehensive plan to address racism at elite private schools, using her family's wealth and influence to fund initiatives rather than perpetuate harm. 2 days later, at Millbrook Prep's graduation ceremony, the audience witnessed something unprecedented in the school's 150-year history. As Zara Williams stood at the podium to deliver her valedictorian speech, she was joined by Madison Crawford, who had requested permission to make a public statement before the formal ceremony began. "My name is Madison Crawford," she said to the surprised audience of families, faculty, and students. "3 weeks ago, I racially harassed Zara Williams at our prom, and I need to take full responsibility for that action and its consequences." The audience shifted uncomfortably as Madison continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. "I was raised in a family and a community that taught me to see people like Zara as threats rather than peers, to view my advantages as merited rather than inherited, and to protect my privilege by diminishing others. I am here today to publicly apologize to Zara, to commit to doing better, and to announce initiatives that will ensure no future student at Millbrook Prep faces the discrimination that I inflicted." Madison then outlined a comprehensive plan that her family was funding: mandatory bias training for all students, faculty, and staff, the establishment of a full-time diversity and inclusion coordinator position, the creation of a scholarship fund specifically for underrepresented students, and the implementation of restorative justice practices for addressing discrimination incidents. But perhaps most significantly, Madison announced that she was deferring college for a year to work with the Southern Poverty Law Center and other civil rights organizations, learning how to be an effective ally rather than a passive beneficiary of systemic racism. When Zara finally took the podium to deliver her valedictorian speech, she spoke to an audience that had been transformed by witnessing authentic accountability in action. Her words about resilience, excellence, and the power of standing up to injustice carried new weight, because everyone present had seen the real-world impact of both racism and resistance. 3 weeks ago, I learned that my strength is not measured by my ability to endure hatred, but by my willingness to challenge it, Zara said, looking out over the faces of classmates who had watched her be humiliated and then watched her transform that humiliation into power. I learned that my boxing training taught me something more important than physical toughness. It taught me that champions are made not by avoiding difficult fights, but by choosing which battles are worth fighting and how to fight them with honor. Zara paused, her eyes finding Madison in the audience, then continued. Today, I want to challenge every person in this room to think about what kind of champion you want to be. Will you be the kind who wins by keeping others down, or the kind who lifts others up as you rise? Will you use your privilege to exclude, or will you use your power to include? The speech that followed would be quoted in graduation ceremonies across the country. Zara spoke about the mathematics of resilience, how every act of discrimination she had faced had been multiplied by her determination to prove that excellence couldn't be diminished by prejudice. She talked about the physics of change, how applying pressure to systems of oppression could create momentum that transforms entire communities. But most powerfully, she spoke about the chemistry of reconciliation, how authentic accountability could transform toxic relationships into catalysts for healing and growth. Madison Crawford hurt me 3 weeks ago, Zara said, her voice carrying across the silent audience. But today, Madison Crawford has shown me something I didn't expect, that even the most privileged among us can choose to be part of the solution rather than part of the problem. That's not excusing what happened, but it is recognizing that people can change if they're willing to do the hard work of examining their own biases and using their power differently. The standing ovation that followed lasted 7 minutes, but more importantly, it marked the beginning of a transformation that would extend far beyond Millbrook Preparatory Academy. Within weeks, the Millbrook model of addressing racism in elite schools was being studied by educators nationwide. A combination of victim-centered accountability, institutional reform, and systemic change had created a template that other schools began implementing. Madison's public accountability had provided cover for other privileged students to examine their own biases and use their influence constructively. The story went viral again, but this time the focus was on transformation rather than trauma. News outlets covered the unprecedented nature of Madison's public apology and commitment to change. Social media celebrated both Zara's grace in accepting accountability and Madison's courage in offering it. The narrative shifted from black girl faces racism to community transforms through authentic reconciliation. But perhaps the most significant development was the emergence of a national movement among young people who had been inspired by both Zara's strength and Madison's accountability. Student organizations began forming at private schools across the country, demanding not just diversity initiatives, but comprehensive examinations of how privilege and power operated in their institutions. That the movement grew when other students who had been present at the prom began coming forward with their own statements of accountability. Trevor Hamilton, who had joined Madison's initial attack, made his own public apology and committed to working with organizations addressing toxic masculinity and racial prejudice. 3 other students who had participated in the harassment took similar steps, each acknowledging their role and committing to change. More importantly, students who had been bystanders began speaking about their complicity in systems of exclusion. The 200 students who had watched Zara be humiliated without intervening began examining their own responsibility for maintaining environments where such attacks could occur. The ripple effects extended beyond individual accountability to institutional change. Millbrook Prep's Board of Trustees, facing intense scrutiny and pressure from alumni and parents, implemented the most comprehensive diversity and inclusion program in the school's history. They hired Dr. Patricia Morrison as their first Chief Diversity Officer, established a restorative justice program for addressing bias incidents, and began recruiting faculty and students from historically black colleges and universities. The most powerful moment came during a community forum held in the school's auditorium 6 weeks after graduation. Zara, who had initially planned to spend the summer training for college boxing and working on her transition to Howard University, instead found herself standing before an audience of current students, parents, faculty, and community members who had gathered to discuss the ongoing work of creating inclusive environments. Change is not a destination, she told the packed auditorium. It's a daily practice. Every day, each of us has to choose whether we're going to be agents of inclusion or complicit in exclusion. Every day, we have to decide whether we're going to use our voices to lift others up or stay silent when they're being torn down. But the most significant validation of the transformation came from an unexpected source: the other black students at Millbrook Prep, who had initially been skeptical of the attention Zara's story had brought to their school. Junior Mollet Johnson, who had been one of the few black students to maintain a low profile throughout his time at the school, stood up during the community forum to speak. "For 2 years, I watched Zara face things that I was too scared to face," he said, his voice breaking with emotion. "I thought survival meant invisibility, that the best way to get through this school was to make myself as small as possible. But watching her stand up, watching her speak truth, watching her demand better, it made me realize that I was doing myself and my community a disservice by staying silent." Malik's words represented a broader awakening among students of color, who had developed survival strategies based on minimizing their presence rather than asserting their rights. Zara's example had shown them that excellence and advocacy could coexist, that standing up to racism didn't have to mean sacrificing their education or their futures. As the summer progressed, the transformation continued to deepen and expand. The Crawford family's foundation, previously focused on conservative political causes, redirected its resources toward racial justice and educational equity initiatives. Judge Crawford recused himself from several cases involving racial issues and began working with legal organizations to address bias in the criminal justice system. But perhaps the most meaningful development was the relationship that developed between Zara and Madison, mediated by Dr. Morrison and grounded in the hard work of authentic reconciliation. They began meeting weekly, not as friends but as two young women committed to understanding how racism had shaped their experiences and how they could work together to create better outcomes for future students. "I'm not asking you to forgive me," Madison said during one of their sessions. "I'm asking you to work with me to make sure that what I did never happens again." Their collaboration would eventually lead to the creation of the Williams Crawford Institute for Racial Healing in Education, a research and training organization that would work with schools nationwide to address racism and promote inclusive excellence. The institute, funded by the Crawford family but guided by Zara's vision and expertise, would become a model for how former adversaries could work together to create systemic change. The climax of Zara's story was not revenge or retribution, but transformation and reconciliation. She had shown that true strength lay not in the ability to destroy one's enemies, but in the capacity to transform them into allies committed to justice. 2 years after the prom incident that changed everything, Dr. Zara Williams stood in the boxing ring at Howard University's athletic complex, her gloves raised in victory after winning the NCAA Women's Boxing Championship. The crowd erupted in celebration, but Zara's thoughts were with Coach Santos, who had flown in from Oakland to watch her fight, and with her parents, who had supported her through every challenge and triumph. The journey from that humiliating night at the Ritz-Carlton to this moment of athletic triumph had been marked by achievements that extended far beyond the boxing ring. Zara had maintained her perfect GPA while double majoring in psychology and African American studies, conducted research on racial trauma and resilience that was being published in academic journals, and established herself as one of the most influential student activists in the country. But perhaps more significantly, she had transformed her painful experience into a platform for systematic change that was creating better outcomes for students across the nation. The Williams Crawford Institute for Racial Healing in Education had become a national leader in addressing racism in schools, working with over 200 educational institutions to implement comprehensive diversity and inclusion programs. The Institute's approach, grounded in both Zara's experience of victimization and Madison's journey of accountability, had proven remarkably effective at creating lasting change rather than superficial compliance. Madison Crawford, now a junior, at Spelman College, where she was studying sociology and education, had become one of the most sought-after speakers on racial reconciliation and allyship. Her transformation from perpetrator to advocate had been documented in numerous articles and case studies, but she always emphasized that her redemption story was secondary to the ongoing work of justice. "My story is not about how I became a better person," she would tell audiences. "My story is about how Zara Williams' courage and grace created space for me to become a better person, and how we all have the responsibility to create that space for others." The two young women maintained their professional collaboration and had developed a respectful working relationship, though they were careful to maintain appropriate boundaries. Dr. Morrison continued to facilitate their interactions, ensuring that their partnership remained focused on systemic change rather than personal healing. The impact of their work extended far beyond individual institutions. The Millbrook model had been implemented in over 500 schools nationwide, resulting in measurable improvements in academic outcomes for students of color, reductions in discriminatory discipline practices, and increased enrollment of underrepresented students in advanced placement courses. But perhaps the most significant development was the emergence of a new generation of student leaders who had been inspired by Zara's example to speak out against racism and advocate for change in their own communities. Young people who might have previously accepted discrimination as an inevitable part of their educational experience were now demanding better and working to create the changes they wanted to see. The legal implications of the original incident had also created lasting change. The Department of Education had used the Millbrook case to establish new guidelines for addressing racial harassment in schools, and several state legislatures had passed laws requiring comprehensive bias training for educators and administrators. Zara's academic work had contributed to the growing body of research on racial trauma and resilience, with her thesis on the psychological impact of racial microaggressions on academic performance being cited by researchers and policymakers working to understand and address educational disparities. Her boxing career had also flourished, with several professional promoters expressing interest in her future beyond college. But Zara had already decided that her post-graduation plans would focus on expanding the Institute's work internationally, bringing restorative justice approaches to schools and countries around the world. "Boxing taught me that the goal isn't to destroy your opponent," she reflected during an interview with Sports Illustrated. "The goal is to demonstrate your skill, your preparation, and your heart." The same principle applies to fighting racism. The goal isn't to shame people into submission, but to demonstrate that there's a better way to live and work together. The personal cost of her transformation into a public figure had been significant. Zara had struggled with the loss of privacy that came with being a symbol of resistance, and she had worked with Dr. Morrison and other mental health professionals to develop strategies for maintaining her emotional well-being while carrying the weight of others' expectations. Her relationship with her parents had deepened through the shared experience of navigating national attention and working for social change. Marcus Williams had taken a leave of absence from teaching to work full-time with the Institute, while Dr. Angela Williams continued her medical practice while serving on the Institute's board of directors. The transformation at Millbrook Prep had been profound and lasting. The school's student body was now 30% students of color, a dramatic increase from the 2% diversity that had existed when Zara arrived. Academic outcomes for all students had improved as the school implemented more inclusive pedagogical approaches and created supportive environments for learning. Most significantly, the culture of the school had shifted from one of exclusion and hierarchy to one of inclusion and collaboration. Students who had previously felt marginalized now saw themselves as valued members of the community, while students from privileged backgrounds were learning to use their advantages to lift others up rather than maintain their own positions. Ripple effects continued to expand as graduates of the transformed Millbrook Prep carried their commitment to inclusion into their college and professional environments. The class of 2024, the first to complete all 4 years under the new diversity and inclusion programs, had achieved unprecedented success in college admissions, with 100% of graduating seniors accepted to 4-year universities and 40% receiving full scholarships. But perhaps the most meaningful measure of success was the feedback from current students of color, who reported feeling safe, supported, and celebrated in ways that previous generations of students had never experienced. The fear and isolation that had characterized Zara's experience had been replaced by confidence and community. On the evening of her championship fight, Zara received a video message from the current class of black students at Millbrook Prep, congratulating her on her victory and thanking her for the changes she had made possible. The message ended with a promise that carried the weight of intergenerational commitment. We're going to keep fighting the fights you started, and we're going to keep winning. As Zara looked toward her future graduate school, international work with the Institute, and a potential professional boxing career, she reflected on the journey that had begun with racist humiliation and had led to unprecedented transformation. The girl who had been told she didn't belong had created spaces where every student could belong. The teenager who had been attacked for her excellence had built systems that celebrated excellence in all its forms. The boxing ring had taught her that champions are made not by avoiding difficult fights, but by preparing for them with discipline, courage, and strategic thinking. The fight against racism required the same qualities, and Zara had proven that young people could be powerful agents of change when they refused to accept injustice as inevitable. Her story continued to inspire others around the world, but Zara was most proud of the tangible changes that had been created, the policies that had been implemented, the young people who had been empowered, and the institutions that had been transformed. The measure of her success was not in the recognition she had received, but in the recognition that other students were now receiving for their own excellence and contributions. Zara Williams' story began with a 17-year-old girl facing the ugliest form of racism and what should have been a celebration of her achievements. It ended with a young woman who had transformed personal trauma into systemic change, who had turned a moment of humiliation into a movement for justice, and who had proven that the most powerful response to hatred is not revenge, but transformation. Her journey teaches us profound lessons about the nature of strength, the power of accountability, and the possibility of redemption. Zara's strength was not in her ability to physically defend herself, though her boxing training had given her the confidence to stand tall in the face of cruelty. Her strength was in her refusal to let racism define her story, her determination to create change rather than simply survive discrimination, and her grace in accepting accountability from those who had harmed her. Madison Crawford's transformation reminds us that people can change when they are willing to examine their own biases, acknowledge the harm they have caused, and commit to using their privilege differently. Her journey from perpetrator to advocate demonstrates that authentic accountability requires more than apologies. It requires action, commitment, and the willingness to center justice rather than personal redemption. The story also reveals the collective responsibility that communities have to address racism and create inclusive environments. The 200 students who watched Zara be humiliated without intervening had to confront their own complicity in maintaining systems of exclusion. The administrators who had ignored patterns of discrimination had to acknowledge their failure to protect all students. The parents who had passed down racist attitudes had to examine how their biases had shaped their children's worldviews. But, perhaps most importantly, Zara's story demonstrates that young people can be powerful agents of change when they refuse to accept injustice as inevitable. Her experience shows that the combination of individual courage and collective action can create transformations that seemed impossible. The girl who was told she didn't belong ended up reshaping the entire concept of belonging for future generations. Intersection of racism and sexism that Black girls face in educational settings is a reality that demands our attention and action. Research shows that Black girls are suspended at rates 6 times higher than white girls, are more likely to be seen as less innocent and more adult-like than their peers, and face unique challenges that affect their academic performance and mental health. Zara's story puts a human face on these statistics, while demonstrating that change is possible when communities commit to doing better. The role of sports and physical training in building resilience and confidence cannot be understated. Zara's boxing training had given her not just physical strength, but mental discipline, emotional regulation, and the unshakable confidence that comes from knowing you can handle whatever comes your way. Her story shows how athletic training can be a powerful tool for empowerment, particularly for young women facing discrimination and adversity. The transformation of Millbrook Preparatory Academy, from an institution that excluded and marginalized, to one that celebrates and empowers all students, provides a roadmap for other schools seeking to address racism and create inclusive environments. The Millbrook model demonstrates that superficial diversity initiatives are insufficient. Real change requires comprehensive examination of policies, practices, and cultures that have perpetuated discrimination. As we continue to grapple with racism in all its forms, Zara's story provides both inspiration and instruction. It shows us that the most powerful response to discrimination is not just individual resilience, but collective action that transforms the systems that perpetuate injustice. It demonstrates that accountability and reconciliation are possible when people are willing to do the hard work of examining their own biases and using their power differently. The call to action from Zara's story is clear. We cannot be passive in the face of racism. We cannot wait for others to create the change we want to see, and we cannot accept that discrimination is an inevitable part of the experience for students of color. Whether we are students, parents, educators, or community members, we all have a role to play in creating environments where every young person can thrive. Zara Williams' journey from humiliation to triumph reminds us that champions are not made by avoiding difficult fights, but by preparing for them with discipline, courage, and strategic thinking. Her story proves that the most powerful victories are not won by defeating enemies, but by transforming them into allies committed to justice. The girl who was told she didn't belong created spaces where everyone could belong. A teenager who was attacked for her excellence built systems that celebrated excellence in all its forms. A young woman who faced racism with grace and strength became a catalyst for change that continues to ripple outward, creating better outcomes for students she will never meet, but whose futures she has brightened. In a world where young people continue to face discrimination, where schools continue to fail students of color, and where communities continue to struggle with the legacy of racism, Zara Williams' story offers hope. It proves that change is possible, that justice can prevail, and that the courage of one person can transform entire systems. Her boxing gloves hang in the Williams Crawford Institute's main office, not as symbols of violence overcome, but as reminders that strength comes from preparation, discipline, and the unwavering belief that we can create a better world for those who come after us. The fight against racism continues, but because of Zara Williams and others like her, it is a fight that we can win.